Da 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 da. I thought I'd started this off with a with copyright infringement, because joining me for this interview is Joe Szymanski from Elections Interview. Joe, welcome to the show, and I hope I pronounced your last name correctly.
No, man, you got it just right, man. Jonathan, thank you for having me on today. I know you wanted to talk about Pennsylvania for a while, and I'm always willing to talk Pennsylvania
Well,
politics, so I'm excited to
well,
be here today.
well, let's start with some personal news. You have a new position at Elections Daily now, right? Do you want to talk about that?
Yes, officially. Well, I've been in this position for about a month now, but officially, I am now our head of the interviews team, which is very exciting. That's a position that I've gained through kind of controlling our main interview sources, which is our my interviews with candidates, Peter Meyer, Michelle Fishbach, Stephanie Bice, Cara Eastman, Victoria Spartz. I have many more came on in the summer and the early fall, who are running for Congress. Obviously, I've started my Virginia 2021 series, of course, as well. I'll be speaking to Leslie Haley, who is the newest Republican entrant into the race, into that Republican primary for the Attorney General's race in Virginia. Delegate Mark Levine, who's running for Lieutenant Governor on the Democratic side. I'm looking into. It looks like we're going to get something set up there as well. So I've officially taken control of that reign with my positions there. So that's something, of course, that I'm very happy to be doing, and very excited that we're going to continue to see more from me, even though I've started school now, second semester, officially started this week. But with my schedule and everything that I was able to work out, I should have more time than I necessarily did sometimes in the fall to be able to continue to bring this stuff to you guys, on a pretty weekly to bi-weekly, style, which I'm very excited to do.
Hey, I can say that I'm 3 weeks into my semester here in Canada, and I feel like I also have the time to be able to do amazing interviews like these. But in terms of Pennsylvania, we need to begin with last weekend's news concerning Congressman Scott Perry. Do you want to explain what happened there and what the implications of that is if there is a special election due to an expulsion?
Well, I know I received some criticism on the second link we posted out that, from some Republicans who, were like, hey, what is this guy talking about? I don't think Perry is going to be expelled. I did say that in the piece in the little write-up I did, that I did say it's going to be very hard for him to actually be expelled. I think he could face it, mainly because Senator Dick Durbin has pledged to investigate this incident, whether anything comes from that or not. I said he could potentially face expulsion, and that could become problematic within its own right. I do not actually personally think he will be expelled. I just don't think that the numbers just aren't there. I think that's pretty clear, just based off the impeachment vote alone. Even, I believe you need 2/3 to kick someone out of the House.
That's right.
And that's not going to happen. I did mention it as a possibility there. But I do think, it gives his opponents in the district more ammo. Yes, President Trump won this district. Yes, Mr. Perry won this district. But, from compared to their 2016, I mean, this was not a technical district back in 2016. This was part of the redraw in 2018. But in 2016, under these old lines, it was only Trump +9. It was Trump +5. This year, Joe Biden made some real inroads. With the way it is, Dauphin County is continuing to get slightly more bluer as some of its more suburban-esque towns around Harrisburg are starting to trend towards Democrats. And then even in Cumberland County, Camp Hill and the areas that are technically the Harrisburg suburbs that are in Cumberland County are also starting to trend blue. And, I think it is a fair criticism of Scott Perry, who is a member of the Freedom Caucus, that he is probably slightly more right-winged than this seat would actually entail. And that probably puts the seat in more danger than what it would normally be. I think that is I would say it's a legitimate concern to Pennsylvania Republicans. His seat could get redder. It could get bluer. We're going to have to see how the lines are drawn. It is likely to get redder because it's probably going to take in more of Western Cumberland, which is, compared to the eastern part that it takes in now, which is mainly Harrisburg suburbs. You get incredibly rural there. That'll be much more Republican compared to what it is currently right now. But it is still, even with that, it would still theoretically be a blue trending district, slightly less so than it is now, but still trending towards the Democrats. I just think, and Perry was considering runs for higher office. I think that would be understandable. Even though he was this, obvious farther to the right congressman, he won 2 races in a swingy House seat. That would theoretically give him, fair want to say, hey, I think I can do this. I think I can win statewide. If I can win this district, that should allow me to win statewide. I think that's a fair thing to say. But, I think that brings up questions to him if he decides to hop in either of the 2 statewide races. That's going to bring a lot of questions. That's going to bring a lot of kind of unwanted attention to, the other candidates, I think, because they might have to answer, Scott Perry did this. Do you think he was wrong in doing so? That's going to bring a lot of questions to that. I think it was not a great move. Personally, I clearly have stated that out. I don't think it was a great move. I don't think he will face legitimate punishment for it, but, he's brought more trouble on himself than he needed to be. I think that's very fair to say.
I just want to say as an aside, I think you and I had a conversation about Pennsylvania 10 a few months ago, and I was of the opinion that Scott Perry would run behind Donald Trump and that Eugene DePasquale would outrun Biden. That didn't happen. I think that you said Trump won this district by 5 points, because I think that Perry won it by 6.6.
Yes,
so that
Scott Perry won it by around 6.5, 7 points. That's because of a slight overrun in the Cumberland area, at least from one of the maps I've seen.
Right, but many of us thought that it was the opposite was going to happen. That DePasquale was going to outrun Biden. That didn't. No, happen.
I think that was absolutely one of the more surprising things that we saw. I think on election night, I think we saw that surprise in a lot of places and a lot of House races across the country, where we thought we were going to see House candidates outperform Biden, where it was actually the other way around. We saw that in a lot of places. I mean, I think we saw that in Indiana 05 as well, with a more Victoria Sparks, where I mentioned I got to interview someone who ended up outrunning Donald Trump, who was probably more right wing than that seat entails. That suburban Indianapolis, Marion district. Someone who was considered pretty right wing. And instead it was someone who was able to outrun the president there.
But let's talk go ahead.
That's the sign of thing. But if something like this had happened before the election, I obviously don't think that would happen. I do think this is the type of thing that could definitely change people's minds, if it's hit hard enough.
So let's talk about another thing that you have somehow gotten yourself into hot water for, and that is the idea that John Fetterman is actually not the favorite for the Senate nomination. Just a bit of a background here. Pennsylvania has a Senate race on the ballot next year. John Fetterman is in the race. Everyone seems to think that John Fetterman is the favorite in both the primary and the general. Correct me if I'm misquoting you. You seem to think he's the favorite in neither of them. If that's the case, who is the favorite, and explain why is it that you think that? Because actually, believe it or not, I agree with the reasoning, but take the moment to explain.
Well, I wouldn't say that I don't necessarily think he's not favored in the general. I would actually say that no one candidate would be favored in the general right now. I expect Pennsylvania's Senate race to be the closest in 2022, just because of how the state is and how we do things. In the past decade, we like when we have open races to generally be pretty close. But yeah, I think there's been a lot of conversation online, especially Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman. He's a larger than life figure in both the literal and figurative sense. He is a 6'8". He played offensive tackle at Bloomsburg University in college. So, that means he's going to be this big guy. He's 6'8". Like most Pennsylvanians do, he likes to wear shorts in wintertime. And he's just not, he's got this kind of very much different look compared to your normal politicians. He doesn't wear a suit a lot. He only usually wears like a button down shirt that's short sleeves. He's just not what your typical looking guy is. He has connections to Braddock, which is where he was mayor until he became lieutenant governor, which is a very small but still very blue area in Allegheny County.
think it's majority African American, in fact.
Yes, it is. It is indeed majority African American, but he mainly made headlines because he was very progressive. He's called himself a socialist. He's aligned himself with the Bernie Sanders campaign both in 2016 and in 2020. You know, he was kind of surprisingly he finished a kind of surprising third place in that 2016 Senate primary for this very same seat behind eventual nominee Katie McGinty and former 2010 nominee Joe Sestak. But here's the thing, people have said, Fetterman he's now this incumbent lieutenant governor. He might have all this name recognition now. He's going to connect to these folks in Western Pennsylvania. But, but that's the problem, though, is that John Fetterman comes from Western Pennsylvania, and that's his first and biggest hurdle. What Pennsylvania does, and this is something that I don't believe maybe only a couple, maybe even no other state does, is that on its statewide primaries for congressional races, state house races, statewide races, Pennsylvania will put the home county of the person, any person who is on the ballot. So if I were to run for Congress in my district, I would have Lancaster. My home county would be Lancaster. It would show me as a Lancaster candidate. It just wouldn't be my name, and then Lancaster as my home county. And that has led to some incredibly geographical voting results in Pennsylvania. And that's kind of shown throughout this past decade, whether the race was competitive or not. The best example, maybe recently, the 2020 Democratic primary for Auditor General.
Oh, absolutely.
Six different candidates ran, all from kind of different areas in the state, and all six candidates won their home counties, along with one or two other counties that are geographically or demographically similar.
I remember when the results are coming in, because the Pittsburgh stuff comes in first, Michael Lamb was in the lead, once the Pennsylvania stuff the Philadelphia stuff came in, Nina Ahmed took the lead.
Yeah, and I'm gonna go connect to that later with my little spiel here. But then in 2018, for both that lieutenant gubernatorial primary, which Pennsylvania does something very interesting, in which the parties select their lieutenant governor's candidate on a separate ballot, but the governor and lieutenant governor are then elected jointly. The lieutenant governor is not elected separately from the governor of Pennsylvania. Because I've seen that disconnect be made because the primaries are separate for governor and lieutenant governor. That means they will eventually form together to form one ticket.
Effectively, the voters pick the running mate.
Yes, effective. It would be effectively if, back in the old days when the vice president was basically chosen at the convention and not by the president himself. Go ahead.
Because I've seen variants on the whole running together. In some states, I think Florida, Michigan, the governor's nominated, then he or she picks the running mate, and then in places like Kentucky, they pick when they file.
Yes, that is correct. But Pennsylvania, they're on separate ballots for both parties, but then once they are selected, they are combined together as to one ticket. That sometimes could lead to interesting results. Sometimes campaigns try to coordinate. Republicans did that in 2016, but the results were quite different. Scott Wagner, even though the gubernatorial primary in Pennsylvania on the GOP side was very close in 2018, only about a 7-point difference between eventual nominee Scott Wagner and Paul Mango, who finished second. Wagner's chosen lieutenant gubernatorial candidate, Jeff Bartos, who was considerably more moderate than what Wagner was, ran away with that primary. He got 51% of the vote compared to Mango's chosen lieutenant governor candidate, who only got, I think, 23. So we have so far avoided, but we have come close sometimes to events like that happening. But in 2018, in that lieutenant governor's primary, I think I just posted this map a couple of days ago. It was quite clear again. We had John Fetterman sweeping, and I mean sweeping, the western and a good part of the central portion of the state, which is more geographically connected to the western part of the state. I mean, the man won about 82%, I think, of the vote in Allegheny County. But in the end, he only finished with 37.5% of the vote. And I would certainly make the argument that if it wasn't for the fact that incumbent Lieutenant Governor Mike Stack, who was the only reason this was even happening was because Stack was facing heavy threats of staff abuse and overspending. Wolf Aligned PACs aligned to Governor Wolf didn't care who won that race as long as it wasn't Mike Stack. So They kind of spent just to
It was
get.
that bad.
Yeah, it was a an underlooked aspect of recent Pennsylvania political drama for sure. But Stack, again, he was from Philadelphia. Nina Ahmad, now of kind of infamy almost, was also in that race. Again, also from inner city Philadelphia. But also, this is the important thing. Kathy Kozone, who was a Chester County commissioner, was also in that race. And those are the four candidates. So you had, the one from Western Pennsylvania, three from, Southeastern Pennsylvania. And again, Fetterman only got 37.5% of the vote. That was enough, of course, to get him over the line because of the divide between Stack, Ahmad, and Kozone. And I would be very much say if Mike Stack had just dropped out of the race altogether, I think it'd be certainly quite possible that it at least would have been a closer race. It ended up being, I think, 37.5 to like 24.6 was Ahmad in second place. If Stack had dropped out altogether, we would have been talking an incredibly tight race, maybe even seeing Fetterman barely lose.
So this is all a long-winded way of saying the Democratic strength is shifting from Southwest Pennsylvania to the Philly suburbs, and for that reason, the candidate coming from Philadelphia is likely to be the nominee and has the edge.
Yeah, exactly. And that's really Fetterman's big problem because there are a lot of candidates in southeastern Pennsylvania who would be very good candidates for Democrats. The big four Southeast Pennsylvania women. I've mentioned this in my article too. There's been a lot of criticism from especially younger Democrats that Pennsylvania has never elected a woman senator or governor. And across our history, we've only elected women 4 times to statewide positions. 2 of them end up being Barbara Haffer. Well, 5 now. Stacey Garrity was, of course, just recently elected treasurer. That brought our total to 5 elected. But two of the most recent ones, Barbara Haffer and Kathleen Kane, also ended up dealing with some corruption issues. Haffer nearly went to jail after her time was over, while Kane had to resign and went to jail during her term as Attorney General for issues with corruption charges. So, women's rights, women's activist groups, especially along with the Democratic Party, Emily's List especially, I know have been encouraging some of these women to run. The big one to watch out for, I do think, is Chrissy Houlihan. She currently represents the Chester County-based 6th district, and she also represents Reading, which is part of Berks County, but she also represents the city of Reading. The big problem for Houlihan is that Pennsylvania is losing a congressional seat once redistricting happens.
So it's going to go further into Berks County.
Yes, she represents Chester County and part of Berks County, mostly the city of Reading. The big problem for Houlihan is that because Pennsylvania is losing, it is not even likely at this point Pennsylvania is going to lose a seat in redistricting, bringing our total of districts down from 18 to 17.
Yeah, that's been a given for a couple of years now.
Yes, that's been a given for a couple of years now. Just not enough population growth in the suburbs, and some of the loss in population out. Erie especially has bled population in the past decade, so Erie can no longer really sustain it.
Yeah, but by the way, so in terms of Pennsylvania's 10th growing, I should point out that unlike Erie, which is shrinking, I believe Harrisburg is growing. So does that necessarily still mean that the 10th is going to take in more areas? Or
no, I mean it will, just because losing a district means that all these are going to have to get in more population from what it was. If you go to Dave's redistricting website, if anyone is interested in any of that, if you try and do what the current 10th is right now, under 17 districts, it's you're about 50,000 people short.
Has he updated it for the 2020 likely reapportionment?
Not yet, but under using 2018 numbers and estimated populations in 2018, you'd have to take about 50 to 60 more thousand people in. You have to understand that Dauphin County, while that area is kind of growing, it is not very big. Harrisburg is not a big city. Dauphin County is not a big place.
Yeah, Dauphin has to take in York as well.
Yes, these are not big places. Dauphin County is it is smaller than Lancaster County. It is more comparable to York County, quite honestly, in size. Our capital is not a very big city.
I could spend all night talking about how South Central Pennsylvania is an emerging battleground. But before I move on to the governor's race, I do have to ask about the Republican side, because I have heard rumors that Don Jr. is going to run on the Republican side against Ryan Costello. So I'm just asking, is Wikipedia wrong about that?
There has been some rumors because Don Jr. Made some connections within the Northeast side. I find it personally highly unlikely. The Pennsylvania GOP, whether you think it's a crap show or not, does have some pretty strong control over primaries and nominees compared to some other states. I find it pretty unlikely that even though he is a Trump, that John Jr. be welcomed with open arms. The Pennsylvania GOP is not necessarily a place that has nominated Trumpy candidates or supported Trumpy candidates.
Lou Barletta?
Well, Lou Barletta, of course, a big name, but 2018 notwithstanding, I mean, look at a 2020 list. Obviously, of course, Trump was at the top of the ticket, but you look at Timothy DeFore, at the support at the endorsement convention, beat two much further right-wing Republicans in Dennis Stuckey and Chris Dush than himself to win the Pennsylvania GOP nomination, causing both Stuckey and Dush to drop out of the primary altogether. This isn't a GOP that necessarily puts conservatism over everything. That's certainly not the case when it comes to the actual body itself endorsing candidates. That's not the case. I don't necessarily. I think if anywhere, I think Don Jr. is actually going to look somewhere out in the Midwest. Quite honestly, he's got this big hunting background. He's kind of made himself kind of known for that. I personally don't think Donald Trump Jr. will be running in Pennsylvania anytime soon. I'd be very surprised if he were to end up doing so.
Okay. Looks like Don Jr. will be looking elsewhere. So let's move on to the governor's race, because that's also getting heated up. And I often hear the same names at this point, name dropped for both the Senate race and the governor's race. Are things sort of beginning to sort of settle down and candidates starting to sort themselves into either Senate or governor?
That's certainly a true case. Obviously, the Democratic side, especially after now former Treasurer Joe Torsea lost to Stacey Garrity in November. Current Attorney General Josh Shapiro he's been angling for this job, people think, since 2018. Wolf has basically pseudo endorsed him as the successor, which is why Fetterman is going for the Senate race and not the governor's race as a lieutenant governor. There's the reason for that, and that is because of Josh Shapiro. Shapiro, I would be stunned if he was not the Democrats' nominee. Legitimately, that would have to be one of the most stunning upsets, I think, in history if Shapiro did not end up to be the Democrats' nominee.
Even bigger than Michael Lamb losing the nomination for Auditor General.
It would be a lot more shocking than even that. Shapiro losing, that would mean the Eastern side candidate would somehow have to lose, and the incumbent Attorney General of the state. Be one of the most shocking things I think anyone could ever see.
Yes. Oh, sorry. I was going to say, on the Republican side, I'm wondering, I've sort of had this idea that Tim DeFore and Stacey Garrity could run to get one running for governor, one running for lieutenant governor, because they're the only two statewide candidates that the GOP has right now who have not said, no, I'm not running, because Pat Toomey said he's not running. So who do you think they're going to take a run for it?
No, I don't. I think both Garrity and DeFore have promised they will at least serve at least one full term. Honestly, I think their time could come in 2026. I could vary, the idea if, say Shapiro wins this election, that becomes then a 12-year itch where, Democrats will have 12 years of control of the governor's mansion in Pennsylvania. Obviously, that's a long way away right now. But that's certainly, I think DeFore's and Garrity's time will come in the future. I don't think 2022 is that time. That's just an honest answer. For me, if you look at the Republican side, I think there's going to be a lot more state level names that you're going to see. State senators, especially, I think, hopping in this race. I know the very controversial Doug Mastriano, the state senator from Franklin. He very controversial currently because he was kind of running the head of the idea of trying to overturn Pennsylvania's electoral results in the presidential race. He's definitely, if he's going to run statewide this year, that will be the race he runs. He will run for governor. Bill, there's been a lot of talk about maybe some congressmen could happen in this race. I think if there is a race, though, that we'll see a person jump from the state, Senator or House and get the nomination here, I think it will be the GOP side on the governor's race. I think we could see a couple state senators go hard for that race, and I think that it could be a state senator who finds themselves out of it.
And what about Lou Barletta? Is he in or out?
I think Barletta could there's gonna be a lot of questions about Barletta. You know, I personally, I know the question, is Lou too right wing? I personally am okay with Lou Barletta. If I couldn't vote in 2018, I was too young still. I was only 17 at the time, but I would have voted for Barletta over Casey in 2018. I would not be opposed to Barletta being the nominee. I think we do have some better options out there than Barletta, but I do know that he could bring some of the fundraising and some of the knowledge of running a statewide race that not a lot of these potential gubernatorial candidates would have right now. And he's really one of the very few legitimate nominees. I know Scott Wagner could do it again, but in my opinion, he's not a legitimate nominee considering how badly he got demolished in 2018 and the kind of the joke that he is. But I think Barletta, he would be an interesting candidate. I don't think he would be our best candidate, but he's far and away not the worst candidate we can nominate.
I vaguely remember Scott Wagner getting into hot water over comments he made at some point. I forget exactly what context that was.
Like comment. I remember. It's very funny. I was actually visiting a college that day. It was we had off school for some reason in high school that day, and me and my mom went down to Baltimore to visit Loyola, Maryland, and we're eating lunch. And I look, and one of the first tweets that pops up is a video of Scott Wagner saying, we need to debate Governor Wolf, and I'll stomp on your, I'll come ready with golf spikes to stomp on you if needed, and basically made some in-error comments about threatening the current sitting governor with stomping on his face with golf spikes, which is an incredibly violent thing for any person to say. It'd be very inappropriate for any person to say about anyone, even less so for anyone who was running for the position of a governor of any state.
I can imagine that Tom Wolf probably sent a thank you letter to the GOP for nominating that guy.
I would imagine, yeah.
Yeah. So why don't we talk about something that was actually a subject of one of your articles from the middle of last year, and that is primary challengers. Mm-hmm. And you talked about the Justice Democrats getting a foothold somewhere in Pennsylvania, and the one of the candidates you mentioned was Brendan Boyle, who's a white candidate, and I think is a plurality white district or plurality black district in
it is technically, it's like 51% white, but it's very close. So let's just say that it's very close.
And that's the profile of a district that has seen, with a white district that has seen a candidate go down to defeat, at least until last year with Lacey Clay falling to Cori Bush. That was an example of a CBC candidate losing to one of those challengers. But until that point, it seems like Brendan Boyle is the archetype of that kind of primary challenge target.
Well, you know what? I think Boyle has been, to a certain extent, he might have to wait to see how the districts shape up. He takes in, the only reason this is even, slightly majority white, his district in the first place, is because it takes in a bit of Montgomery County and all of northern Philadelphia. If it didn't take in that part of Montgomery County, it would be barely plurality black. I mean, it would be plurality white, but it would be majority minority. Depending on how these districts shake out, it's quite likely that it becomes a Philadelphia-only district, which means it will have to take in more of the city's African-American population. It could quite possibly become a plurality black or at least a majority minority district. But to be fair to Boyle, he's positioned himself very well, though. He connected himself very well with the Biden campaign in 2020. That's not something to be considered. And honestly, we were talking about Senate candidates. You talk about the 4 Pennsylvania females, but Boyle is not someone who should be underestimated, especially with his connection to the Biden campaign. But if he were to decide to stay in Congress, that he could be someone who could be in danger just because he might not theoretically represent the demographics of his seat. And he also resides in northern Philadelphia. He is from northern Philly. He is not from the center city at all. He is from the northern part of the city, a part of the city that has seen some trends right in the Trump era and some trends left in certain parts of it, but certainly some trends right in the Trump era as well. It is a more white, more working class area up there in North Philly. So Boyle, if he were to stay in that redrawn district, might not necessarily represent fully the area of the district. And I could see a strong progressive, minority African-American candidate at least making a decent run at him. Maybe not
Right.
beating him, but making him sweat out a little bit.
Yeah. So someone like, say, State Senator Nikhil Saville, or someone like that, or who just won, I think, got elected to the state senate last year.
Yeah, Nikhil Saville could be an interesting candidate. Some people mentioned Malcolm Kenyatta. I don't know. I don't believe Kenyatta's House district would be in Boyle's district in its current form or even its withdrawn form. But also Kenyatta, even though he is a progressive, has also attached himself to the Biden campaign very early. He would not be someone. I mean, there are even city council and ward candidates, who could potentially, take a run at him. Obviously this is all very much theoretical right now. Whether Boyle is, in danger or not, I can't really say until I would see his new district. But I think, he is certainly one I think that could be on a watch list.
So this brings us to a segment that I like to call Jonathan's Hot Takes. Now, my hot take this time is that I think that the real candidate who could face a real primary challenger is Mike Doyle over on the end of the state. Doyle, primary challenger. I specifically think that Mike Doyle, who represents most of Allegheny County, I think could specifically face someone like State Representative Summer Lee, who is a member of the Democratic Socialists of America, progressive, who unseated a member of the Democratic establishment, or he could potentially face someone like Sarah Innamorato, who I believe was also elected at the same time. Does that sound plausible, or is the district just not the kind of thing that would support that?
Well, here's the thing with Pittsburgh is that while Pittsburgh certainly has its younger bases and its African American bases that are growing more progressive, Pittsburgh and the fact that it has taken a good part of Allegheny, makes it significantly different than Philadelphia. Pittsburgh has not, again, it's starting to see some changes in, the jobs that are there, the people who live there, but in its essence, it's still very much a white working class town. It is not as minority heavy as Philadelphia is. Philadelphia has a lot of black voters. It has a lot of a very substantial black population. Pittsburgh does not have that. That in itself is pretty clear, and I think that kind of allows Doyle to separate himself a little bit. He himself is kind of an institution in the city. He faced a primary challenger this year from someone who did get attention from people like Lee and the DSA, but Jerry Dickinson. He didn't really make any noise there. He wasn't really able to pursue anything. Just because it could be, and I think part of that is because it's not just the city of Pittsburgh alone. Again, what we see in these primary challenges is that really they're basically just based in cities for a lot of these primary challenges. Pittsburgh is not that. Pittsburgh as its own cannot hold, an entire congressional district in itself. So it has to expand out into Allegheny County, whether that's into the north or the south. And that kind of protects Doyle to a certain extent. Doyle,
it's all the same, right?
Yeah. So, that kind of protects him though to a certain extent, and that, that would hurt. That might force someone like an Morato or a Lee to have to wait until Doyle to retire, which, isn't impossibility in the next decade to see him retire potentially. He is getting up there in term.
Fun fact, I believe that Mike Doyle, sorry, okay. He replaced, I believe, Rick Santorum, who represented that seat in the 90s.
Yeah, so it was before Doyle replaced Santorum before that seat was fully in Pittsburgh. It was again, Pennsylvania had a lot more population and a lot more congressional seats back then. So that seat was basically the Allegheny suburbs. Mm-hmm. It's crazy to think that Santorum represented a seat that could swing like that, but he did. But it certainly shows the changing times in Pennsylvania. But yeah, Doyle's kind of an institution. He's mainlined himself very well in there with the citizens who do vote in these primaries. It would have to be a very monumental effort for someone like a Lee or an Innamorato to do, and that would require them, we don't allow, or we do allow you to file for two races when it comes to primaries, but it is looked down upon and it rarely ever succeeds because then you're seen as being very unconfident that you would win your own race.
So it's more unpopular in other states, because I've seen that sort of thing happen in other states. Like,
yeah.
Paul Ryan, I think, was on the ballot for his House seat when he was the vice presidential nominee.
Yes, that is correct. That is correct. But yeah, I don't think either Lee or Inamorto would want to give up kind of their growing position in the state House caucus to take a shot at a seat that I do think is out of the range right now, just because of the demographics alone.
Okay, so before we get on to the ballot measures that I think that have been on Elections Daily's radar, at least some of them, it has not escaped my attention that Pennsylvania once was home to pro-life Democrats and pro-choice Republicans. The people that come to mind are probably Bob Casey Sr., who was then followed by Tom Ridge, serving in just position of governor. To this day, Pennsylvania actually has a U.S. Senator, Bob Casey Jr., who is pro-life. But I think that in recent years, we've seen a sort of a decline of the pro-life Democratic caucus. And in fact, just last year, Adam Ravenstahl, who I believe represented part of Allegheny County, lost a primary challenge to Emily Kincaid. And I think that was, by the way, I mentioned to these two before we started this call. This is largely because of the Democratic machine in Pennsylvania that's based in Allegheny County is facing stiff competition from Allegheny County Councilor Bethany Hallam, who, by the way, is going to be on this show tomorrow. And she's really supporting these primary challengers to these pro-life Democrats who, exist not just in parts of South Pennsylvania like Pam Snyder in Greene County, Chris Senato in Newcastle, but also people like Brandon Markusek, Dan Deasy, and Anita Kulik, who I believe are in Allegheny County itself. So I find it really fascinating that there was a time and still to this day, that pro-life Democrats were a big thing in Pennsylvania. And I guess it's just sort of interesting to see the parties get sorted on this issue like they do nationally.
Yeah, that was kind of, Pennsylvania for a long time has had a history of things that make it kind of electorally unique. Geographical, it used to really kind of be the pro-life, pro-choice thing kind of being switched around a little bit to certain extents, certainly in certain parts of the state. Geographical voting is kind of our big quirk now. It has always been our big quirk. It still is now our big quirk, but like you mentioned, it's shifting to the national level as per more conservative Republicans have started to win seats in now solid Republican areas, that are taking away from maybe some pro-choice Republicans. And now you're starting to see that movement really happen in southwestern Pennsylvania, especially Allegheny. Again, like you mentioned, with these DSA style challenges to their left, they're starting to win these races. That's the change that has come to every state, and it's really starting to really hit Pennsylvania now. It'll be interesting to see how much it changes and how much things will survive. But the Costas falling in 2018 was really the start of saying, okay, something's definitely changing.
Yeah.
And that was the first big sign. And Ravenstahl falling is just another piece of that puzzle.
Yep, and you start to wonder if South Texas will be the last bastion for pro-life Democrats, because a few actually did survive in 2020. But I do want to talk about one more thing. I'm not sure how much time you have left, but I definitely want to talk about ballot measures that are potentially going to be on the ballot. I believe Pennsylvania does not have an initiative process, and that all ballot measures are referred to by the legislature.
Yes. So so how it works in Pennsylvania is that the legislators can propose any type of amendment to the state constitution, but kind of certainly, or a ballot measure or something like that. But it is the kind of this way in Virginia as well. It's kind of a Commonwealth thing. The voters can't bring anything forward, but when the state does it, the state can't just change the constitution on itself. They have to then send it they have to vote on it and pass it and then send it. It doesn't have to be signed by the governor or anything, but it goes then to the voters.
Right. And so one of the ballot measures that's been on Elections Daily radar, from what I've seen, is a ballot measure that I think would change the way that the state Supreme Court is elected. Do you want to explain that?
Yes. So Republicans in 2015 had a very miserable failure with the Pennsylvania Supreme State Court elections. That saw it to become a very large Democratic majority at 6-1, or it's either 5-2 or 6-1. I can't remember off the top of my head. But that has caused I think even some of the strong Democrats in the world would kind of admit that the Pennsylvania State Supreme Court has been in some ways quite activists, especially against Republican measures. That, of course, has led to some quite angerment from Pennsylvania Republicans. And in response, because of kind of the activist ways of the court, they decided to come with this constitutional amendment that would see, instead of the state Supreme Court being elected statewide, they would instead be elected by districts, which means you would probably see a Philadelphia rep judge, a Collier County's judge, a central Pennsylvania judge, a south central Pennsylvania judge, an Allegheny judge, a western Pennsylvania judge, and like a Lehigh Valley Scranton area judge,
Right.
that would probably make up the borders. But that would, like you said, that would drastically change the way we do things, and make Republicans, have probably a little bit of an easier time taking control of the state Supreme Court.
Someone on the works, I think, for Daily Kos elections, I think pointed out this may, I don't know if this claim is true or not, but it's that the principle of one man, one vote has not, which applies to state legislators, has not been applied to Supreme Courts that are elected by district. And for example, in Illinois, where they've elected by district, apparently they haven't updated the districts in decades. And so there's a big population disparities between the Supreme Court districts. And is there a risk that could happen in Pennsylvania?
It could be, but the good news, I mean, to be fair to this amendment, there are rules, about population numbers. Pennsylvania, unlike Illinois, who is kind of lost and changed quite rapidly, Pennsylvania, luckily drawing now with the information that we have, would probably make those numbers slightly more accurate and less, suspicious to major population shifts. I do think, though, that is a legitimate concern. That is something that would, need to be talked about. But I think doing it by area, obviously having one based in Allegheny, which would basically be a Pittsburgh area judge, one being based in Philadelphia, you've got your Philly area judge, and then having one for the Collier counties, those are 3 Democratic seats right there. And then you theoretically have competitive ones in the Northeast and Southeast part of the state. I think the idea that these are personally unfair, I think are wrong, and I think they're short-sighted. So the fact that Pennsylvania can be very transcendent geographically sometimes. And, when it comes to voting, and, weird things happen. Some areas don't always go the way you expect them to go. And I think that can be especially true with judicial races.
There are actually a number of interesting amendments that are being proposed. One of which would, I think, change the way that the lieutenant governor is selected, and it would have the candidates themselves pick their running mates. And I believe there's a measure that would institute no excuse absentee voting in the state, because I think that there was a concern that the Constitution actually doesn't allow it, but it took place anyway, and that there's no one that specifically concerns Governor's Tom Wolf's ability to declare an emergency. These are all interesting amendments that I think are worth discussing. Do you have any thoughts on those?
Yeah, I mean, I think, yes, you got to start off the emergency powers one. Obviously, the Republican-controlled state legislature and Governor Wolf have gone back and forth over Wolf's continued use of emergency powers during the coronavirus pandemic. While I think I can understand the position they're coming from, I think this amendment leaves it a little bit too short. It had to be 21 days until you'd have to try and renew or get legislative approval to continue using the emergency powers. I think that might be a little bit too short. I think like a month, 30 or 40, 30 to 45 days, something like 45 days, I think is much more understandable and I think fair. I think 21 days is too short, but I understand where they're coming from. I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing ever to check executive power in any situation. But, this is going to be one that I think could be very partisan, and I think it'd be it's almost a smart play, because if you talk about this and this becomes a conversation, and suddenly the one about judges gets lost in the background. And while this one could become very partisan, maybe that lets the judges one kind of not become that way. And that allows what I think more Republicans would rather see passed in the judges bill than this bill about limiting emergency powers. And then you talked about lieutenant governors, that being changed. I think that will be passed. I think there, again, the potential to cause problems with that. We saw that with the Stack-Wolf relationship to a certain extent. Once it deteriorated, I think it's very fair to say, since we don't elect lieutenant governors separately from governors in the general election, there should be no reason that we should elect them separately in the primaries.
Yeah, it's interesting. South Carolina actually was one of the few, because I think throughout the South, it's a common thing for the lieutenant governor to run separately. But South Carolina, I think, was one of the first southern states to actually say they're going to run together. But when Oklahoma, proposed an amendment, it actually was not approved by the voters. So it's interesting.
I think this is one we could see approved just because of, again, I think the stack issue is still on the mind, fresh on the mind to some Pennsylvanians, kind of the issues that he had there. It could become close, but I do think this is maybe the one that we'll see pass. You mentioned, of course, the no excuse absentee. I think that could be one that, that's one that could either pass with flying colors or be very close.
Right.
That's just
I do realize we should probably wrap up soon, but do you have any thoughts on anything else that you want to talk about with regard to Pennsylvania politics, or anything that Elections Daily is up to?
Elections Daily, we're continuing to put out content. Of course, we are coming now onto the month of February. With that, we'll start to see our first monthly update for both our Virginia and New Jersey rankings for the races there. Of course, because we've had some new candidates enter in and some retire in both states. So we'll see official ratings updates from both sides there in the next 2 weeks as we shift into February away from January. And continuing to watch me, I've continued to get Virginia 2021 content out to you. We're going to continue to push content, with people like Jeff Jackson and Mark Walker and John Fetterman already announcing. It seems like 2022 is going to be coming faster than ever before. So keep on the eye for that. And watch us as we start to cover redistricting as well.
And where can viewers find you on Twitter and on electionsdaily.com? I just gave away where they can find the website.
Well, yeah, electionsdaily.com, very easy. We're at Elections Daily on Twitter. For me, it's just at Joseph Szymanski, no underscores or anything, just one full thing at Joseph Szymanski. That's where you can find me on Twitter if you're interested in any of my stuff then.
Joe, thank you so much for coming on, and wishing you all the best as Elections Daily continues to grow.
You know what, Jonathan, thank you very much for coming on. I always enjoy talking about Pennsylvania.